August the 14th, and we're about to undergo week one review. I'm going to give just another 30 seconds or so for people to get online here, and then we'll actually get started. In the meantime, if anybody does have any sort of generic questions you'd like to throw, you'd like to throw in chat, feel free to do that. If they're specific to the content, we'll wait until we actually get into the content. But if it's sort of more generic stuff, feel free to throw it out there.
Greg?
Yeah, I can hear you, barely.
What I was wondering, can you hear me now?
Again, very faintly, but I can hear you.
What I was wondering is there a way, while you are discussing today's topic, if there is a way that you could show us how to debug, that will be helpful.
Well, there really aren't any debugging tools for validation rules and formulas, other than just trying them out and see how they calculate. So, because we haven't started any real programming yet. I'm going to need to mute some folks here. Hold on just a second. Yeah.
There is a debug feature that you can turn it on.
Hold on just a minute, please, because because I got a lot of background noise.
Yeah.
Right. There is what are called the debug logs, and we will get into those in a couple of weeks or so. They're not going to be terribly helpful, though. In fact, I'd argue almost not at all helpful for debugging formula fields and validation rules. There, you just have to play with them, and you have to just kind of test them. Yeah, there's really not, because it's not a programming language. It's a scripting language, which is, I know, a subtle difference, but that is the difference. So. All right, I'm going to mute you guys here. I am going to go out and get into the deck here. Let me get that shared. Share an application, which is called PowerPoint. There we go. Okay, so the purpose of today's session basically is for me to, I'm hoping in an hour, not much more than that, kind of do a review of all the things that we've talked about. And if you're not muted, guys, would you please mute yourself? It'll make it easier for everybody to hear. Please do that. Again, in about an hour or so, my goal is to kind of do a review of the content that you should have experienced as you were going through the different trails and reading the different documents and stuff this week. I do hope there to be at least 15, 20 minutes at the end then for questions as well. And the way I'm gonna do this, this is the first time you've had one of these end of week things. The way I look at the content, there's sort of 4 pieces to it. I will also stop after each of what I think are the pieces and take any questions about that chunk. So we won't necessarily have to leave all the questions till the end. So I think that'll help us along a little bit to do that. Okay, again, if you guys have put yourself on mute, that would really help a lot. If you're not, let's get started here. So I'm sort of asked to remind you that all the materials you're seeing in this deck, as well as any of the materials that you're seeing in Trailhead, etc., are copyrighted, not to be shared outside of your own personal use, especially the materials in this deck. Also asked to remind you that should you be in the position to make any purchasing decisions related to Salesforce, that you make those decisions based on what's currently in the product, not on what might be future release content, etc. Doesn't really apply to what we're talking about today, because I'm not going to be talking about any future stuff here. There's no forward-looking statements being made today. So you basically had 4 sort of chunks of content this week, not a terribly technical term. They talked a little bit about the Salesforce architecture, sort of getting you used to Salesforce. What are some of the mechanisms by which we can, sorry, I'm going to go out and mute some folks here again, folks, because there's a lot of noise going on here. Give me just a second. There we go. All right. Let me go back to the deck now. All right. So we talked a little bit about platform architecture, sort of getting to know Salesforce, particularly if you were new to it. what the different options for doing customization are. And then probably the largest part of the content this week was on objects, fields, relationships. And then you had some roll-up summary, validation rule type stuff as well. So let me get started in sort of the review. If you've been around Salesforce as long as I have, which is about 15 years, this slide has changed a lot over time, but the slide has been present in some way, shape, or form in almost every training class forever. And the way I kind of want you to think about it, I'm going to have you think about it sort of two ways. Is we're going to go from the bottom up. So at the very bottom, sort of all the little circles and stuff on the very bottom, what I want you to think of that as being is the shared database, the shared execution environment, etc. What you and I would normally think of as the cloud. And again, it's not particularly relevant to this course, but what I always tell people is you can sort of envision Salesforce as one big, huge data center in the cloud, someplace or other. Of course, the cloud is, a building someplace. But in actuality, what it is a whole bunch of data centers scattered all over the world. And at a particular client, a particular business, their environment gets assigned to one of those environments when they spin it up. But still the concept is there's sort of this shared environment. Just want to double check something real fast. Sorry about that. Let me make sure we're getting. Okay. All right. Making sure people are getting what we need here. Right. So the very bottom level, I want you to think of as sort of the shared architecture. The layer above that, where you see IoT, social data, Thunder, CRM data, etc. Think of that as the data that is maintained in the cloud. It comes in several different flavors. IoT, Internet of Things, that is something that Salesforce does support. The concept there is, and this is not really Salesforce's implementation, but an example is if you've bought a refrigerator in the recent past, it can actually tell you, for example, and automatically send a message to the manufacturer if there's something wrong with the freezer. If you've been in one of those, in any like fast food business recently that has one of those really fancy Diet Coke machines where you first choose what type you want, is it caffeinated, is it decaffeinated, etc. Application that sits, again, folks, please mute yourselves if you're not. The application that sits behind that is actually a Salesforce application. Guys, you got to mute yourselves, please. You got to mute yourselves. Otherwise, I'm going to have to bounce back and forth a lot to do that. So please mute yourselves. All right. One more time back here. So those fancy Coke machines, the application that is implementing those is actually on the Salesforce platform. It's a tool that's called Field Service Lightning. And an example is when one of the syrup dispensers gets low, what automatically happens is a message is sent to the distributor, wherever that happens to be, that, hey, you need to deliver some more syrup to this particular physical location. That's all done with Salesforce. That's an example. Social data. There are a number of different Salesforce tools that can tie in with Facebook and LinkedIn, Twitter to some degree, even YouTube and a couple of the other social media mechanisms. They're frequently used for marketing in particular. I can't go into deep detail on all these things, but CRM data, the customer relationship management data, that how do we do lead management? How do we do account management? How do we do opportunity management? The typical business stuff. And then there's a whole platform that's sort of an optional piece of Salesforce that helps you manage all of that stuff. There's some deduplication tools, for example, that are actually available out of the box. And that keeps your data cleaner, for example. Kind of sitting on top of that is this concept called Einstein. It's all about AI, artificial intelligence. Excuse me. And there is some Einstein that's available out of the box, but most of Einstein is actually an add-on feature, which means you pay extra money for it, which helps you do what they call here predictive analysis, machine learning, etc. Based on how this particular sales opportunity looks right now, and then comparing it against other opportunities that looked similar to it 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, what is our probability of this opportunity actually closing and winning? What's our probability of actually winning that deal? And if the probability is really, really low, maybe we, the sales organization, don't put any more energy in that. If it's high, we put a lot of energy in that, etc. So artificial intelligence. The layer above that are the different sort of development environments, if you will. You're going to have a module, I forget exactly when, sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks, that talks about the app exchange. So it's where you can actually either download free or perhaps purchase applications that were built to run on the Salesforce platform. The Lightning environment, the Lightning development environment is used to build Lightning components. You're going to have a little bit of experience much later on in this 6 weeks with what are called Aura components. They're a little outdated now, but a lot of people are still using them. The more up-to-date, somewhat more modern, are what are called Lightning Web components. They've been out about a year. The Aura components have been out maybe about 4 years at this point. The Force.com environment. For those of you that have been, doing some of the exercises this week, every time you went to setup, you were really kind of drilling into the Force.com environment. It's the environment that allows us to do point and click customizations. It's also the environment that allows us to do Apex and Visual Force customizations. And again, you'll see a little bit of Apex coming up this next week. I think they introduce you to it. Visual Force will come a little bit later in this 6 weeks. And then this course isn't going to cover anything about Heroku, but Heroku is another web platform that is supported by the Salesforce environment. It is particularly applicable for business to consumer type applications. Things that are Amazon-like or iTunes like, where a customer creates an account and then then you sell your product, whatever that product happens to be, through that environment. And then at the very top level, here's the different sort of flavors of applications. So there's the sales application. How do I sell to my customers? There's the service application. How do I provide service to my existing customers? The marketing application. How do I market what I sell or the services I provide to get new clients to whom I can sell? There's what are called Salesforce communities. Those are not covered in the 6 weeks other than at like a 50,000 foot level. The term community is sort of a modern term for portal. So it's the mechanism by which within Salesforce, a customer can create, a Salesforce customer can create a customer-facing community for their customers. It could be a self-service community, so it's sort of a part of the service. They can go out and ask a question, and help can be provided, etc. There's a number of analytics applications that really kind of feed into Einstein. You can build custom applications. Those custom applications can really fit into sales, service, marketing, or community. There's a number of more commerce-related applications. Those are the ones that typically run on Heroku. There are IoT applications. They typically feed into Einstein, but then their data is in that IoT area down there. Quip is a tool that Salesforce bought, I'm going to say it's about 2 years ago, that allows you to do real-time collaboration, real-time updating of documents with a team, etc. And again, the App Exchange I've sort of mentioned, I jokingly call it the Salesforce iTunes store, where there's a lot of stuff out there. Some of it's free, some of you have to pay for, etc. And again, you do have a simple module on that coming up later. So again, that's a lot of words sort of describing the architecture. The other point that I hope you came away with in the discussion is this whole idea of this being a multi-tenant environment. So this infrastructure in the cloud, which again is really just a big data center in a building sitting someplace, is shared. It's not just one client that's using the CPU time, the disk space, the database, et cetera, et cetera. It serves multiple clients. There's ultra high degree of security. There's never been a security breach in the Salesforce environment. That you can't say that about some of the other multi-tenant environments. So one client's data is completely invisible to another client's data, et cetera, et cetera. But because it's multi-tenant, because it's a shared resources, Salesforce puts some constraints on what you can do. And again, you'll get into some of these details later on. But you might have already heard about the concept of governor limits. You're only allowed to consume just so many resources, if you will, while your code is running, because you're not allowed to call it runaway code, because it would then be consuming more than your fair share of the resources of the shared tenant, of the shared computing resources in the old cloud, if you will. Again, we'll talk more about that many times this week, particularly as it relates to, you're going to see some, if you're an experienced developer now, you're going to see that you're going to need to adopt some new design patterns as you build your Apex code in order for your code to run effectively and efficiently in this multi-user, multi-tenant environment. All right. Again, I think that I've already kind of said all the stuff that's on this page. Lots of shared stuff. And the database is shared. The tables in the database are shared. Basically, it's just at the heart of it, it's one big, huge database conceptually where all the different clients have their data in it, but it's partitioned in a way that one client can't see another client's data. And again, there's one conceptually large runtime engine up there where code runs, where validation rules run, et cetera, and it's shared. And it's, as they say, this you're allocated a certain amount of resources. If your code, especially if your Apex code, exceeds those resources, it actually generates what's called an unhandleable exception. So we'll talk much more about that as our 6 weeks together goes on. It's our job as developers, especially as Apex developers, to write our code in such a way that those exceptions don't occur. All right, I'm going to stop for a minute. Let me go back to the chat window here. So are there any particular questions about what's going on here? Yeah. So Melissa made a comment. Yeah, that wasn't a hack. That was a Salesforce mistake. That wasn't a hack. There was somebody in the Salesforce team that actually rolled out something that was technically correct. So they had a little guffaw they had to take over, but that wasn't a hack. That was an inside job, if you want to call it that. Are there any questions on this whole concept of multi-tenant, shared environment, et cetera, et cetera?
Hi, Greg. I had a quick question about governor limits. I know we're going to get into this more, as you said.
I'm not going to take those questions now because it doesn't make sense outside the context of Apex code. And since we haven't talked about them, unless it's really fast.
It's pretty simple. I just want to know what are they like? Why are they called governors? As in, like, what is being governed?
The resources that you can consume. So governor here doesn't mean governor of California. Governor here means control.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's control. Great. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is Salesforce multi-cloud? Well, again, it sort of depends on your definition of cloud. They say Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, et cetera, but all of those still run in the one Salesforce cloud. It's in the one shared architecture. Yeah. AWS, Azure, those are different clouds. That's not Salesforce. AWS is I can't think of Amazon Web Services. So that's not. No, I wouldn't argue that it's similar to speed governors in some vehicles. No, because once I'm up to top speed, I can continue going top speed. It literally is you are given a pool of resources, and then I'm going to stop on this because this is getting too far for where we are in the first week. You're given I call it a container of resources, and as you consume those resources, it takes stuff out of it. And when that container is empty and you try to take something out of it, boom. So I'm not going to do any more on governor limits now because we'll talk much more about that later on here. But anything else about the shared environment, etc.? Okay, I'm going back to PowerPoint then. All right.
Oh, sorry.
So what are our options for doing customizations? So when a new Salesforce customer gets their licenses and people start logging on, they get kind of baseline functionality out of the box. What are the things that we can tweak? What are the things that we can change? How can we make those changes, etc.? So this is a picture that you will see in Salesforce documentation over and over and over and over again. What it actually represents, I don't know if you guys have heard this term before, but it's called the MVC model, Model View Controller. The model, as it's represented in Salesforce, is the stuff at the bottom. I'm focusing on the right-hand side right now. So it's what they call Salesforce objects. It's Salesforce fields. Remember, the object is the table. The fields are the columns. The relationships is how they're bound together in this idea of lookup and master detail that we'll talk about in a while. The user interface are all the different ways that a user might physically interact through their laptop, through their phone, through their tablet, etc. There's tabs, there's applications, there's page layouts. The list is much longer than those. That's the V, the view, the user interface. Excuse me. And then in the middle is the thing called business logic. The business logic, again, what you've seen so far, validation rules. It's really the only one you've seen so far, but you'll talk about processes and flows and workflows and approvals and all that kind of stuff. All of the stuff on the left-hand side can be manipulated, can be customized with point and click. If we go to the right-hand side, there are some alternatives. So I'm going to start at the top this time. If I don't like the way the application looks declaratively, I have the ability to override that in a couple of different ways. I can create visual force pages, which there's still a lot of them out there. I think Salesforce is sort of encouraging people not to create them now, and instead, in their place, to create Lightning components. Lightning components is a much more modern view of a user interface than Visual Force is. If I can't get done what I need to get done with validation rules and flows, et cetera, I've got Apex code sitting in the middle. And a developer, actually do have the ability to manipulate the data model programmatically through what are called the APIs, the application programming interfaces. I can create Apex code that will create a new object, that will create a new field, that can create new relationships. It's probably not done very often, because that means you'd be doing it on the fly, but it is something that can be done. So all I want you to think about on this page, keeping it really simple, left-hand side represents at least a subset of the things you can do declaratively, point and click, no code. I said right-hand side, I meant left-hand side. Right-hand side are all the things, are again, sort of a subset of the list that you can do by writing code. When you're writing Lightning components, you're using HTML. When you're writing Visual Force pages, you're actually using what are called Visual Force components or Visual Force tags. Apex, if you haven't seen it yet, looks a whole lot like Java, but it's not Java. And then API, again, application programming interface, you actually call the APIs from Apex code. So there's sort of a connection there. All right, let me get just 3 or 4 more slides, and we'll take a quick review of this as well. You can, if you're planning on taking the PD1 exam, there'll probably be at least one or 2 questions that will sort of put a scenario to you in terms of, blah, 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 here's the scenario. what would be perhaps the best way to solve the question. I know those questions are actually pretty hard, but what they're pointing to here is that there's always typically three possibilities. Depending on the complexity of the requirement that you're implementing, it might be pure point and click. The advantage of point and click is that you're absolutely guaranteed it will not break when Salesforce goes to a new release, which is every 4 months, plus or minus a week or two sometimes. It's usually relatively quick to create. Not everybody would agree that Flow is necessarily quick to create, but it's relatively quick. And depending, again, how deep you're going into Flow, I wouldn't necessarily say it's simple. I argue that in Flow, you probably do need to have a little bit of programming background to understand that all the possibilities of Flow. Another example, kind of going in the middle, is you might decide to buy stuff, and that's where you go out to this thing called the App Exchange, see what type of applications are out there, do a search. Many of them let you do a trial install, use it for 30 days, use it for 15 days, etc. Some of them are free. When they're free, you don't usually get any support or maintenance. When you pay for them, then there often is at least some minimal support. And if they do a maintenance release, you get to automatically, download the maintenance release, etc. And then the third choice, the most complex, but also the most powerful, is that you write code. Again, there's several different types of code. You can basically have the Salesforce platform do almost anything you want it to do. What will become really important as we get later on in our time together this 6 weeks is that if you decide to go the programmatic route, it becomes really important to understand the second bullet on the right-hand side, how the custom code, how your Apex code builds and kind of accentuates, sometimes even gets in the way of some of the point and click stuff. So again, we'll talk a lot about that as the week goes on here. All right, again, let me stop here. Let me go back to my chat window. Anybody have any questions here? Well, there's a bunch of questions. Let me get here. Is there a roadmap to allow non-developed users to create Lightning components declaratively? No, never will be, because it requires both HTML and JavaScript. Lightning components are absolutely going to be, that's always going to be programmatic. If you have a PE, what does PE mean? Help me, somebody. Professional edition? Is that what PE means? I assume somebody? I'm assuming yes. Can you deploy Apex code? Whoops. Yes. Okay. I honestly don't know the answer to that. To be honest, I have never worked with Professional Edition, but I will write it down and see what I can find. PE with API. I'll see what I can find. Cool. Does Salesforce expose external APIs? Meaning, can an external system make a call to Salesforce? Yes. You have to write Apex code in such a way that it is exposable, and they support both REST and SOAP. It's sort of a matter of opinion whether you want to do REST or SOAP. SOAP is somewhat easier to code sometimes, but it's less flexible as well. Yeah, I mean, I don't agree that an API is either SOAP or REST. Again, guys, mute yourselves, guys. All right, I'm coming back. Yeah, sometimes Salesforce exposes the same API to both a SOAP and a REST interface, but those are different APIs. Yeah, and then you can create your own custom web service, which is callable from the outside world. You just have to write the code in such a way that Salesforce knows it's to be exposed to the outside world. You'll have a module, I think it's in week 4, that sort of tells you how do you have to shape your Apex classes in order for them to be exposable to the outside world, in order for them to be a consumable web service. Yeah. So you will get a little bit more on that. Let me scroll up here a little bit. So again, I'm not going to go too deep. This is one of those things that we could probably talk about for hours. So the database that we see as developers is actually what I would call a logical database. And it's the physical implementation of the database bears almost no resemblance to the logical view of it. The logical view is of a database that's sort of a traditional relational database. Behind the scenes, the physical implementation is much different. I can point you to a white paper to kind of get into the details of that, but it's really, really geeky. But it's that abstraction level that makes it very easy for us to create what I would call a logical database table. Salesforce takes care of the actual physical implementation behind the scenes. That's the beauty of the platform, really. I've heard that this physical Salesforce is actually vertical, so I don't know what that means. Yeah, I'm not going to go there. I don't disagree. That's just way too much detail for where we are now. If you want to do this, if you really want to get into it, sometimes, folks, go out to your favorite search engine and search for, I'll type it in the chat here, Salesforce. I can get my fingers to work. Multi-tenant white paper. Something like that. The name of it changes occasionally over time, but search for Salesforce multi-tenant white paper. And it's really geeky. You got to put your pocket protector on, but it's also very cool. But it really, they don't give away all the secret sauce there because, of course, it's proprietary. But they do shed some insight on what the physical database looks like as opposed to the logical database that we interact with as developers, as system admins, et cetera, et cetera. So take a look for that. All right, let me go back to the deck here. Need to get into the meat of this stuff here. Objects, fields, and relationships. Excuse me. I'm having a horrible allergy day. Again, this is a picture that has been around, or a similar picture has been around for a long time. At a very high level of abstraction, I do agree that a Salesforce object is sort of analogous to a database table. But the idea then becomes that as you start thinking about what does an object really contain, it contains more than just the rows of data in that object. An object contains the user interface. So again, I don't know if you've gotten, you probably haven't gotten there yet, but when you create a new custom object, you don't just get the table that's going to have the rows of data. You automatically get user interface stuff and that kind of things as well. So you get a whole bunch of stuff. You automatically get pieces of the controller. You automatically get, how do I save a record? How do I edit a record, etc. And it will also end up having relationships to it. You'll have this in the related lists, as you've probably seen. It'll have a list of all the children, for example. So what you're kind of looking at on the left-hand side, and just so you know, guys,
Excuse me, Greg, we can't see your slide deck, actually.
I'm sorry. I thought I had shared it. What are you seeing right now? I'm sorry.
We see you.
Okay, well, that's wrong. Obviously wrong. Oh, I see what I did wrong. Never mind. Location. Just 1 second. There we go. My fault. I forgot that you have to go out and re-share it after I go back into chat. Can you see the PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. First mistake this fiscal year. Never mind. All right. So if you look on the left-hand side, the way I would interpret this is that we have the standard contact object. We have a custom object called favorite, and we have established some type of relationship, either a lookup or master detail. I'm not going to worry about that right now. How that then manifests itself in the user interface is that there's automatically a tab for the contact object because it's a standard object. What the tab really is a user interface component that lets me see lists of records or individual records as I click into them. On an individual record, I'll have a number of tabs, related, details, news, perhaps even some other ones. The details are the data that's in the particular row, in this case for the contact whose name is Ms. Edna Frank. And then there'll be a tab called related, which would give me all of what are called the related lists. And that's really the lists of the children. So the way you sort of interpret this here is that as I'm looking at the contact for Ms. Edna Frank, she has two favorites. And I don't know what favorite means in this context, but she has indicated that she has favorited two things, whatever those favorites are. So all that user interface stuff is sort of given to us automatically as a combination of what we automatically get when we have the contact object and some of the decisions we would have made when we created the custom object called favorite. But think of an object as a combination, this is Greg talking, a combination of three things. It's the table, kind of the traditional table. It's user interface components, the tab, the related lists, this thing called the detail page, etc. And then, in thinking of the MVC model from a while ago, you automatically get some business logic. I don't have to know as a developer or even as an admin how a new context gets created. I simply have to click on the new button. And when I'm done, I simply click on the save button. The new record is created. I don't have to worry about that. That's all a part of what we're given in a standard object. For that matter, we're given that in a custom object as well. So, high level. For the purpose of the exam, I would say this is a really important page to know. It's not terribly detailed, but there are standard objects, again, out of the box. Those are mainly the custom relationship management, the CRM, sales, marketing, and service related objects. Custom objects that you create for your particular customer, your particular business's needs. And then behind the scenes, there's a whole bunch of what are called system objects that typically, again, literally sit behind the scenes. But again, depending on what your role ends up being, there are some of them that either as an admin or a developer, you will be interacting with. For example, there's the user object is considered a system object. If part of your job is to create new users, you're creating new users. There's profiles and roles and permission sets. Each of those is an example of a system object. And if your job is to, as you're creating users, to assign them to roles, to create custom profiles, custom permission sets, etc., they will be stored in again, typically behind the scenes, but system objects of their name. If you're taking notes, what you might want to add to this page or just write it in your notes or something, you probably also should know about the concept of external objects for the purposes of the exam. We talked a little bit about those on Wednesday. The idea behind an external object is that there's a customer of Salesforce that, for usually regulatory reasons, does not want their data stored in the Salesforce cloud. They want it stored on-premise in their Oracle database or whatever it is. What we can do in Salesforce is to create what's called an external object, which basically links to that Oracle database, if you will. It would be an Oracle table. And then we're allowed to manipulate that data through a tab in the Salesforce interface, but it's not actually being stored in Salesforce. It's being stored external in the customer's, again, Oracle database, whatever type of database it is. I don't recall whether they have you do it, but there is a module in Trailhead that covers that. What you'd want to look up to find that is they've actually kind of renamed it. The product is now called Salesforce Connect. So just go into Trailhead and search for Salesforce Connect, and that you should be able to find, I think it's a module of like 2 or 3, maybe a trail with 2 or 3 modules in it. But it's, if you want to find out more about that. All right, let me keep moving here. So what is an object again? Objects, if we think of it as the database table, the standard objects come with a bunch of standard fields. The standard objects come with a bunch of standard fields. You really can't make very many changes to those fields. You do have the ability to modify the label. What you'll never have is the ability to modify what's called the field name. That's sometimes also called the API name. That's the name that field is referenced in Apex code. You cannot change that. You then do have the ability to add custom fields to that standard object, which almost everybody will find they need to do. So again, if you haven't seen this page, this is something that's, again, sort of worth knowing for the PD1 exam, because they do sort of expect you to understand, at least at some level, the data model of sort of the out-of-the-box Salesforce objects. So the way you can sort of interpret this is what we're sort of looking at right now, I would argue, is the marketing cloud and the sales cloud. The marketing cloud, sort of the starting point of that is what's called a campaign. A campaign is a mechanism to generate new leads. So the way to read this, if you haven't seen it before, is that a campaign can be associated with zero or more leads. At some point then, those people who are leads, sales has a whole bunch of discussions with them. They typically go through what's then called a lead conversion. Automatically be created for us. Let me do a little scribbling here. What will automatically be created for us when I do a lead conversion is a contact. So basically it copies a lot of the information about the lead into that contact record. It'll create a new account. So again, one of the things that's required in the lead record is the name of your business. That would become the name of the account. And then you also have the option of saying, while I'm doing this lead conversion, also create me a new opportunity, sort of an empty opportunity, which represents then a sales option, a potential sale to this new account. What's also sort of being represented here a little bit is at least one small piece of the Service Cloud. Once we've actually sold things to an account, we then start providing service for it. In that case, the contact is the person who usually makes a call to the service desk or makes some type of contact with the service desk. And we create a case for them. And then the case is associated with an account, because the account is usually the level where service level agreements are kept. You know, what is our required response time? Does first response have to be in 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes, et cetera, et cetera? Okay, I'm going to stop there for a minute. Let me get out of here. Let me go back into chat. Now, I have not been following chat while I've been presenting here, so if you have had a lot to say, I will have to scroll to see it. What are your questions? Well, here's one. Is this diagram fundamentally the same if the org is configured to use person accounts? No, because a person account really is a combination of an account and a contact, but it'll be made visible as an account. Yeah. Do the 3 prongs represent master detail relationships? No, they represent a relationship, but you can't tell whether it's a master detail just by the diagram. All the diagram says is there is a relationship. In fact, I'm just looking at it in my head. All the relationships we would have seen there are all, in fact, opportunity objects, or I'm sorry, are all lookup relationships. Yeah, the crow's feet just mean it's a one-to-many relationship. That's all it really means. Yep. Let me see what else I missed as I was talking here, because these go scrolling by. Let me see what, yeah, that was my fault on the deck. Happened. Okay, yep, got it back.
Oh.
The deck, yep. Me and the crazy deck. Yeah. All right, anything else about what those couple slides on just sort of what we've seen in relationships so far? Okay, well, let me go back then and get back into the deck. And I'll remember to share it this time. Here we go. All right. Okay, so what you're looking at here, this is slide 34, is one part of a custom object. Now, this is not the page I wish they would have shown, to be honest. I wish they would have shown us the details page first, because it's looking at the details page, which would be the biggest clue that this is a custom object. And that's based on a naming convention. So again, if you haven't created a custom object, you will very soon. As I create a custom object, I'm asked to give it a label. So really, what do we want its name to be? You then have to give a plural label. That's primarily used in tabs and in related lists. And then there'll be a third field that automatically populates that's called the object name. So if we had created an object called property, we probably would have had the plural be properties, and then the field name would have automatically been populated with property. But the actual field name, the real field name, becomes property _ C. And that _ C is the visual clue to anybody, especially a developer, that this is a custom object. You don't put the _ C there. The _ C is automatically put there for you. But then what we're looking on in this slide are the fields and relationships that we've created. So again, if you look in sort of the middle column there, field name, you'll see address _ C, assess value _ C. Those are all custom fields. Again, you can tell that by the _ C. But then if you'll notice, what is about the seventh one down, when you create a custom object, you also get some standard fields. And I always thought that sort of sounds weird. You create a custom object, you get some standard fields. Think of those as the system fields. One of them is called created by. That's a lookup to the user. Who created this record? There's another one that's called last modified by. Who made the last change to this record? There's a created date. There's a last modified by date. There's 7 or 8 kind of standard fields that are automatically applied to a custom object. So what these are going to become are all of these together become one row in the table. Every row in the table, in the property table, the property object will have address, assessed value, baths, beds, broker, blah, 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 however many more there happen to be. And then as you'll notice here, again, you'll get more exposure to these. Again, I can't click into it because this is a deck, of course. I can get to the page layout. If I've created lightning record pages, if I've done other types of customizations, those are all available. How they got to this page was going to setup, then going into the object manager, and then choosing the property object to get here. All right, let me hit a couple more slides here, and I'll stop again for questions. If you haven't played with it yet, I would encourage you to play a little bit with the schema builder, because it allows you to sort of conceptualize these relationships. So we're sort of looking a little bit at the same picture we saw back ago when we looked at that idea between contact and having favorites. So the contact object has a relationship to the favorite object. Really, I should say it differently. The favorite has a relationship to contact. Again, if you haven't done a lot of this work before, you often think of these as parent-child relationship. The contact is the parent, favorite is the child. One parent can have multiple children, et cetera, et cetera. I should be scribbling here again, I forget. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Let me get scribbling again. So one contact in this particular case can have multiple children. There's another relationship here. One contact can have multiple offers. So this is part of a real estate type application. A property could have been favorited by multiple people. That property could have offers extended to multiple people if it's a high bid, fast turnaround type real estate market, etc. The other thing that's kind of cool to notice about this, and you can even see it in the slide a little bit, is that the color of the relationship represents something. If it's bluish gray, and I'm kind of colorblind, but if it's bluish gray, that means it is a lookup relationship. If it's a little more kind of reddish purple, as the relationship from property to favorite and property to offer, that means it's a master detail relationship. Again, I want to hit a couple more slides and I'll stop again. As you're creating custom fields, if you haven't done this before, what you'll find is that there's a series of steps you have to go through. They actually give you a pretty nice little wizard of what that step's going to look like. You click on new to create a new field. The first question it's going to ask you is, what data type do you want that field to represent? This is not quite all the data types. There's a couple behind the scenes that are not used very often, but is it going to be numeric? Is it going to be a pick list or a checkbox? Various types of text. There's what are called pre-formatted, phone, email, URL, etc. Time and calendar. Relatively new, you can have geolocation fields where if you're tied to an external site appropriately, you can pull down such things as the latitude and longitude of the address of a customer, et cetera, et cetera. And then auto number, I prefer to think of those as auto increment, and we're going to talk more about formula and roll-up summary in just a couple minutes here. All right, final page, and then I'll stop for questions again. Again, as you create custom fields, you get asked a whole bunch of questions. It's this wizard. It's the second step in the wizard, or it's question 2, that really becomes, in some ways, sort of the most important, because it's here where, if you look right here, you're going to specify the label. So that's what the user is going to see. You'll specify the name, but then that will automatically be used to create what they call the API name or the programmatic name. That will always have the __C again. And that's the name of a field that you use programmatically. So if I'm writing Apex code and I'm and I'm creating a SOCL query, for example, I have to reference the API names when they do that. You also have the ability, I find this really helpful when I'm doing consulting work, to put a description, how is this field going to be used? I don't think this description is particularly helpful. And then you have the option of creating some help text. That help text appears to the user as a little circle next to the field. If they hover over it, the help text will pop up. And I lied, there's one more slide I want to do. And then depending on the data type that you choose, you may have these other selections possible as well. Again, these are not going to be visible or on all data types. Do I want this field to be required? Must the user fill that field in? Do I want the field to be unique? If I choose that, Salesforce will automatically enforce that there can't be any duplicates in that column in the database. Now, again, that's very powerful if you need uniqueness. That isn't available on all field types. Do I want it to serve as what's called an external ID? You're going to have a module, I think it's the 5th week, where you'll talk a little bit about what are some of the tools that I might use to do data imports. And the concept of an external ID is very helpful if you're doing an import from a legacy system into Salesforce to sort of maintain the hierarchies, if you will. And then you have the ability to specify the default value if you want to, you don't have to. And then if it's a number or currency field, you have the ability to specify, what level of precision. So the 30 here means there'll be 3 digits to the left of the decimal point, 0 to the right of the decimal point. So therefore, we're really requesting that it be an integer, essentially. Okay, I'm going to stop at that point. Let me again get back into chat here. Sounds like you guys have been chatting up a storm here. Chat. There we go. All right. If two objects are related, what is the best way to determine which object is the parent, which is the child? Well, it's always, so I'm gonna answer the question in sort of a backwards way. If you think about, it's always the job of the child to point to the parent. It's never the case of the parent to point to the child. So the field on which you create the relationship, that relationship being either lookup or a master detail, is always the child. If you think about the picture we had a while ago, we had contact to favorite, and we had the little chicken feet, if you will. The one side is always the parent. The many side is always the child. The one side is the parent, the many is the child, right? Let me go back and scroll back up here. Michelle, I'm afraid you're incorrect. Lookups do have a parent-child. It's just that it's an optional parent. No, it's still a parent-child relationship. The difference is master detail, the parent is required in order for the child to occur. Let me go back up here. I know I missed a bunch of these. Let me scroll up here. Do lookups have parents? Yes, they do. It's just that the parent is optional. What are the red bars next to fields? That means it's required. So if you're in what's called Salesforce Classic, sort of the old user interface, it'll have a red bar next to the field. If you're in the Lightning experience, it'll have a little asterisk next to the field, but that both means required. Is there a set of system fields that are common? Yeah, I mentioned a few of them. I'm not going to list them all again, but the ones that come to mind are created by, last modified by, created date, last modified by date. There's also an owner field who currently owns that record, and there's 3 or 4. I'm not going to go into any more detail on external ID today because you'll be dealing with that in a later topic. Sorry to put that out there. That will come up in a later topic. Another question, what happens to legacy records when blank values are in the field? Yeah, again, let's talk about that when we talk about data loading and stuff later on here. Are users' profiles considered system objects or standard objects? Those are system objects. You can usually tell the system objects because they do not have a tab, and the way you get to them is via the setup menu. Via the setup menu. Since the schema builder has less functionality, to get this here, than the standard object manager, what would be a use case? Well, I don't know that I agree with that because I can go to the schema builder and I can create new objects. I don't have to just look at them. The advantage where I like the schema builder is it lets me visualize the relationships. The object manager doesn't really let me do that. It lets me build your relationship. Yeah, and that's sort of what Carlos said. It's really, the visualization of it. I'll be honest, I never create objects through the schema builder. I prefer to do that through the object manager, but I frequently use the schema builder, like you said, when you need to sort of visualize that and show what you've done to other people and sort of explain the hierarchy, etc. Well, and Cassandra, what you said here, that's exactly right. That's why I never use it, because the schema builder doesn't do everything that the setup menu does. Yeah, that's right. Yep. Let me see, what else did I miss here? I think I got them all. Let me double check. Yeah, I would, folks that are talking about going to the metadata API, way beyond the scope of the PD1 class. Important, yes, but I wouldn't spend a lot of time on that because that's not going to be covered on the PD1 exam. Can a custom object or field be created via Apex? But yes, it's the API, the custom metadata API, way beyond the scope of the PD1 exam. Making sure I get them all here. All right, I think I've answered the ones that are particularly germane to today's content. So let me go, or this week's content. So let me get back into the deck because we do only have about a half an hour left here. I'm going to ask you guys, I know what you're doing is important. Let's focus on the content for today. Because I think if you'll do better to get ready for subsequent content to focus on the content for today. I appreciate you sharing this other stuff out here, but I think it helps. Focus on the content for today. All right. Okay. So in the exercises and in the trailhead stuff you did today, they had you play around with a couple of different types of relationships. One which is called a lookup relationship. Again, if you're the type who takes notes, a lookup relationship is often referred to as a loosely coupled relationship. A loosely coupled relationship. What that means is a couple of things. It means if I look at the example they have on the slide here, contact is the parent, customer story is the child. We would have created the lookup relationship on customer story because, again, it's always the parent that points to the child. I'm sorry, the child that points to the parent. A customer story would look up to a contact. But because it's a lookup relationship, that would be an optional field. So I could create a customer story without linking it to a contact. That's one of the very important distinguishing characteristics. And that's why they call it loosely coupled. The parent isn't required. The first bullet on the page is also important. Excuse me. Again, this is jumping ahead into some stuff we'll talk about later. And it's actually more an admin topic than a developer topic. But what they're referring to here is when you're creating the security model around the two objects. There's this concept that's called the organization-wide defaults that sort of set up the baseline level of security on all the records in an object. I can set those independently on the parent and the child in a lookup relationship. There's also the concept of what are called sharing rules. I could have different sharing rules, sharing different contacts, and maybe not all the contacts would have access to the customer stories, etc. There's also the concept of what's called manual sharing. I can have different manual sharing. Again, that's a big, broad topic. This course, I don't think, goes much deeper than that. You might want to spend some time looking up the security model stuff in the admin school. And then what you're seeing at the bottom are some of the options when you create a lookup relationship. This would have been in creating a lookup, it'd be in the third step in the wizard when you're creating the relationship. The first step is you want to create a lookup. The second step is what do I want the parent object to be? In this case, I'd be on the customer story. I would specify contact. The third step would give me these. So do I want to make this a required relationship? Do I want to force that I can't have a child unless I have a parent? Might be a good use case for that. It doesn't make it a master detail, though. It's still a lookup. And then what do I want to happen if I delete the parent? The default is what you're seeing here, clear the value of this field. So if I delete the contact, any reference to it in the customer story is simply replaced with the value of null. It's replaced with a value of null. The other options are the second bullet there. If I've checked that one, I won't be able to delete the contact until all the customer stories have been deleted instead. And then the third one, you actually have to request this one from Salesforce. It won't appear automatically. We would actually be implementing what they call cascading delete. If I delete the contact, all the customer stories would go as well. So you have a little flexibility there in terms of how you want the relationship to behave, but no, regardless of how you make it behave, it's still a lookup relationship. As opposed to a master detail, again, they don't use the word on this page. I like to think of this, and it's often referred to as a tightly coupled relationship, a tightly coupled relationship. And again, that means looking at this example, I would not be able to create a custom story unless I attached it to an account. Let me say that again because I kind of flubbed the words here. If we created the relationship between customer story and account as a master detail relationship, that field would show up as required when I'm creating a new customer story, which means I wouldn't be able to create a customer story unless I pointed it to an account. What it also means is that if I, as a user, have access to an account, I will automatically get access to all of the customer stories. I'm going to say that again because that's also very important. If I as a user, not as a developer, but if I as a user have access to see a customer account, if I have read access to a customer account, I will automatically read access to all of the customer stories as well. I can't control that. That's some of the default behavior. It is automatically always a cascading delete. So in this case, if I delete the account, all the customer stories go away. Again, they can add a lookup filter. And then one of the other options, they don't show it on the page here, is this last bullet. Let me get the marker going again here. This guy right here. As you create the master detail relationship, there's sort of a bizarre looking question that says, do you want to allow users, again, not you as a developer, but do you want users to be allowed to reparent this, to change who the master is over time? The default is no, which means if I hooked a customer story to the wrong account, my only recourse would be to delete the customer story, recreate it, and then attach it to the appropriate customer account. This is a nice little, slide 41, I think, is a good little sort of summary slide. And I'm not going to drill through this, but it kind of highlights the master detail relationship here. Is the parent always required? Yes, in master detail. You have to have access to the parent to get access to the children. Yes, etc. I think you can read those as well as I can. All right. Any quick questions on those? Again, let me go back to chat real fast. I only have a couple slides left, but let me get back into chat here. All right. All right, Salesforce ID. I like the idea of doing quick starts. Yep. It says, if we allow reparenting and change parent of a child object, will sharing rules get affected? Yep. If you give it to a new parent and you could have been blocking the new parent, user A might have had access to the old parent, not the new parent. Now they won't get access to that detail as well. Yep. If a user has access to a master detail isn't a record. It'd be the master record or the detail record. Can see all, but can be shared with other user with sharing rules. Yeah, I mean, that's the idea. Anybody that has access to the master record, anybody that has access to the master record through any mechanism automatically has access to all of the detail records. They can get access because they're the owner through sharing rules, OWD. There's a whole bunch of different ways. But again, if a user has access to the master record in a master detail relationship, they automatically always have access to the detail records as well. That's just part of the functionality of master details. All right. Any other questions there? Okay. I think I just have about 2 more slides to wrap up here. Let me share. Oh, I got to share again now. I don't want to screw that up.
Hey, Greg, I had a quick question about Schema Builder.
Yep.
Can you add filters to that to sort of access and play around with like specific subsets of object relationships?
Well, it has, yeah, you can't add any filters, but it has, I think, 3 filters now. One which is all objects, standard object, custom objects, but you can't add any more.
So you can't, in the current iteration of Schema Builder, there's no way to, like, if you have like a particular that subset of objects in a many object org,
Right.
like there's no way to get a quick view of that and go back really quick just with a couple clicks to be like, here's this thing that so rather than like drawing everything out on Schema Builder or
Now I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
like because I'm just I'm new to Schema Builder, sorry, and
Right.
just,
Well, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to accomplish?
I was just picturing like an instance where you have like an org where with like a ton of objects, say,
Yep.
and you're trying to get you have like there's like a relationship with like 10 objects within your org that you like constantly go back to and play around with via whether it's the fields or the relationships or whatever.
Yep. Right.
I was just thinking it would be cool to have a way to just sort of save that like view, kind of like you can pin like a list view or
Well, the closest you're going to get to that is that Schema Builder, air quote, remembers the last view you were in. So if you get something organized on the screen and quit out of Schema Builder, when you come back into Schema Builder, what you had there the last time will still be there.
Oh, cool. That's helpful. That's helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, sure. All right, let me go back into PPT here. And sort of the last piece they had you work on a little bit was this concept of creating formula fields. Again, I think the analogy I used on Wednesday in the QA, if you were there, is sort of like the idea of a formula field in Excel, where in a particular row in an Excel spreadsheet, you can create a formula that pulls data from other cells and calculates some value. But you can the analogy can even go further, depending on how much, depending on what all you've done with Excel. I can have multiple worksheets in an Excel workbook, and one worksheet can reference a field on another worksheet. The analogy there is what they call a cross-object formula. Excuse me, a cross-object formula in Salesforce. So again, they're showing you just one syntactical example of that here. So the idea, and this I'm not sure they made, they didn't really tell you this on the slide. The idea is that we're sitting on the delivery custom object, and we're creating a field on the delivery object. And what it's basically doing is saying, I want you to take the start date. That would be on the delivery object. Again, let me get drawing here. Get a darker color though. So you're going to be on the start date. You're on the delivery object. There's a custom field called start date. And what basically this syntax right here means is you're going to navigate. And I do like the word navigate. The formula is going to navigate up to the course object through the relationship that's there. That's what the R basically means. Grab the custom field called duration _C from it, pull it back down into the delivery field, and add that to start date. So we're taking a value that's on the delivery object, another value that's on the course object, the corresponding course record, really, adding them together. That value is a part now of the delivery record. So it's just grabbing data either from the same record, just a regular old formula field, or from a parent or a grandparent or a great-grandparent through the relationship fields. And the good thing is, if you haven't played with it before, you don't have to memorize the syntax. If you use this insert field here, it actually gives you a little wizard that will help you navigate through those relationships and take you up to the parent, the grandparent, the great-grandparent, etc. So, but you only see that insert field when you're on the advanced formula tab, not when you're on the simple formula tab. So I never use the simple formula tab, because this way you're gonna kind of be guaranteed you've got the correct names, the correct relationships, etc., etc. So formulas, grabbing data either from the current record, assembling it into some meaningful calculation, or data from parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, etc. And then not to be confused with what's called a roll-up summary field. So a roll-up summary field is, again, it's a special field. It can only be created on the master of a master detail relationship. And what it does is pull data up from the children, emphasizing plural here. So again, this is not my favorite example, but the idea is we're creating a roll-up summary field on the account object. We want to roll up across all of a given account's opportunities. And what we want to calculate is a summary of all the expected revenue. So expected revenue is a field on the opportunity object. And then what they don't show you an example here, but I can either do that across all the opportunities, that's what they did here, or I can put a filter in. Maybe I only want to see those opportunities that have not yet been won, or only those opportunities that we lost, or et cetera. I could put any type of kind of a filter in there is what we would do. So again, it's not a formula field. It is not a formula field. It can only be created on the detail. Good grief, it's Friday afternoon, of the master in a master detail relationship, and it pulls data from the detail, summarizes it in some way or form, and it becomes a field on the master object. All right. Any questions on those two ideas? Any questions on, let me get back to my chat here. Any questions on master detail or lookup fields? Or master detail or formula fields, rather. Let me scroll up and see what I missed here. Yep. Is roll-up summary just for numeric data? No, it doesn't have to be numeric. I think somebody said there can be like dates and stuff like that, which ends up being the earliest date, the latest date, etc. Do not, I admit, I'm going to say do not, sorry, Matt, don't do this. Don't try to mimic a roll-up summary field on a lookup relationship, because it can get you in big trouble if you don't know what you're doing. Or if you're going to do it, make sure you do it in an after trigger only. Don't do it in a before trigger. And I'm not going to go into any more detail on that right now. Yeah, this thing that's being referenced called Rollup Helper, that's actually an App Exchange app, which I won't talk about because I don't approve of, honestly. Let me see what else I missed here. I agree that Zoom is better than WebEx. I just don't have any control over that. Yeah, Rollup Helper can get you in big trouble. Can formula fields reference child object fields? Oh, no, because you can only go up. You can't go down. You can only go through from a child, you can go to the parent, but from a parent, you can't go to the child. You tried using a formula and workflow. Well, again, without knowing what you were doing, I'd have to look. But it uses the same formula editor, but it is not exactly the same formula. It's not exactly the same formula syntax. So without knowing what you're doing, can we write formulas on two unrelated objects? There's no cross-object formula unless they are related. Yep. So really the answer is no. I can create individual formulas sorry, I can't think of what I'm talking. Yeah, I can create individuals on the two, but if they're not related, I can't do a cross-object formula. Can you do a summary on a formula field? No, you can't. Well, yes, you can, but it can't be a cross-object formula field. It has to be a simple formula field. So, Carlos, your answer isn't quite correct there. You can do a roll-up of a simple formula field, but you can't do it of a cross-object formula field. Any other questions on formulas and stuff here?
Hey, Greg, Vikas here. Can you explain a little bit, if you can, when you say that on a lookup, you're trying to do roll-up summary?
No,
I understand that. No, you're saying that you cannot do it, but if you're using doing through trigger, first of all, you said it might land into a lot of problem. Can you explain that?
Right. Way beyond the scope of where we are right now.
I know.
So I'm not going to take. If nobody else has any questions, I'll come back to that one. But yeah, I'm not going to take time right now. Yeah. Right. You can mimic it, but you just have to be really, really careful. Anything else on roll-ups or formulas? Okay.
So, Greg, what about dates in formula fields?
What about them?
Getting them in the current time zone instead of GMT.
There are, if you're familiar with the formula editor, there are functions within the formula editor that will allow you to convert that generic GMT into your org's time zone or into the current user's time zone. But they are stored in this sort of behind the scenes in like a generic GMT. Yeah, so look up the formulas that you can see when you're in the advanced formula tab. There's a bunch of time and date formulas.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to go back to the deck for just a minute. Let me get Sharon here. We're just about out of time, but I think we have time to finish this up. Come on here. Get my computer working here. So this is the stuff you looked at this week. And I'm not going to read to you here, but this is sort of the highlights of what you talked about here. There was a number of things that they had you read only. There was some documents they had you go get out of the Salesforce help pages, etc. But what I also want to make sure you're aware of now is what you're going to be hitting this next week. I'm going to sit here and say that the level of complexity is going to go up quite a little bit this next week. Because we're starting now. We're not quite getting into a lot of code yet, but we're going to dig into flow and some of those still sort of declarative tools, because it is very important as a developer to become familiar with sort of, I like to think of there as kind of a wall almost, if you want to think of it, where you'll hit that wall doing declarative development and you need to jump over the wall, which is when you start doing Apex code. You need to sort of understand where that wall is. So you need to understand what are the capabilities of process builder and flow and approval processes and all that kind of fun stuff. And then towards the end of the week, again, this may not be new to you. You will get started a little bit in some Apex basics, little database stuff. You'll start talking about the concept of S objects, which is kind of a bizarre concept in some of the flow of control mechanisms within Apex code. If you're an experienced developer, I don't expect that the last day or so to be much of a challenge for you, because it's just talking about do whiles and while loops and for loops and all that kind of fun stuff. If you haven't written much code before, that might be a bit of a challenge. What are your questions about? Let me get back into chat here. What are your questions before we wrap up the day here? Flow is greater than Process Builder. Well, they are integrated because Process Builder can call a flow, But I understand what you're saying there. Could you, which function validation rules? Oops, it went screaming by me here. Let me scroll a little bit here. Can you associate an IP range to a time zone? No. IP ranges are either associated to your org or to profiles, but not to users per se. Standard fields like phone numbers sort of have validation rules behind them. Yes, phone numbers, not a lot. But definitely the URL and email types will validate that the syntax at least looks like a real email address or a real URL. It doesn't enforce that it's actually there. Let me keep going here. What else we got? Is the PowerPoint available? Yes, that's out in your Trailhead, your virtual bootcamp org. Except I got logged off. But yeah, if you go to the homepage of the developer bootcamp, you will see a link to the login. So you'll be able to have a link to the PowerPoint. You can find that. Can the same org, I missed it, went scrolling away here again. I lost it. The PowerPoint can be downloaded, or it's in PDF form. Yeah, it's not so much a conversion function. It's you can I hate to use the word. It's not really a query. You can sort of determine what time zone you're in, but yeah, time is a real pain in the butt because of how it is. Because how all times are stored behind the scenes in GMT and then converted on the fly into the time zone of the current user. Yes, if another question here, kind of out of order, but that's fine. Well, the meetings are boy, is it Friday? All the meetings are being recorded and will be stored out on your org. That was talked about in the kickoff on Monday, so please go look at that if you haven't seen that. Outbound message question: can encrypted fields be sent in an outbound message? I do not believe so. Can the same Salesforce org be deployed in multilingual mode in two different geographies? Yeah, I mean, you're going to have a whole lot of setup and stuff, but you can. There are two concepts that come to mind. Every profile can have I said that badly. Every user can have a time zone associated with them that is different than the corporate time zone. So you could actually have users in multiple time zones. And then there is the concept of what's called the translation workbench, where if you've gone through the effort, you can translate all your field labels and stuff to one of about 25 different languages, and then based on the user's own language setting, they will be shown the language. But it's a real pain in the butt. Yeah, it's tedious to do that, but it can be done. I don't know that's not usually a developer issue. That's usually considered sort of an admin issue or an admin concept, but I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. Let me keep double checking here. Yeah, I don't see any other questions. We have 3 or 4 minutes left. If anybody else has any questions. Translations in CPQ. Well, they have their own translation engine. Right, so CPQ has their own translation engine sort of built on top of Translation Workbench. So that's one of the products I teach. So yeah, it's a pain in the tuchus. What else we got here? Anything else?
Hey, Greg. I just wanted to ask you because I'm getting surgery. I'm getting like arthroscopic hip repair done on Monday.
You said that on Wednesday, I believe. Yeah, right.
I wasn't sure it was happening. It's just happening really fast, and I was I'm a little worried about like falling behind. Definitely gonna try and keep up with this. I'm just like super new to developing. and I was wondering, like, if I have some questions, would it be okay to like reach out to you? Obviously, I'll be watching the videos if I can't make it, but like, would it
Right.
like reach out to that email address?
Let me share my screen here for a minute. Let me
Okay.
share something else real fast. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to share. Give me just a second to get out there. Here we go. So I'm logged into the virtual bootcamp org that you guys have. Remember that mine looks a little different because I'm instructor than you, but there is, I forget exactly where they have it out here, the ability for you to log cases with your questions. Oh, it's right down here. Yeah, right here. So rather than reaching out to me personally, just log a case here, and then either I or Jeff will respond to that case as fast as we can. We check in with that almost every day, but then it will go to a broader group of people than just me.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure.
We'll definitely do that.
Okay. Anything else, anybody? Okay, we were at our 90 minutes here. I'll stick on the line for a few more minutes if anybody has any questions. Is there a way to see the backend data that are being saved? Tell me what you mean by backend data, David. Well, yes and no. So I sort of love this question. You could spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and days in the Salesforce documentation, and there's something you would never find. And that's what physical database platform are they using? They're using Oracle. But we are about 5 levels of abstraction above the physical database. So is there some way for you to actually look at the Oracle database? No, and there never will be. Because the physical database is their secret sauce. And that's sort of how they maintain the multi-tenant environment. You can only really see your data in that sort of logical format, which is, look at it on a page layout, extract data, et cetera, et cetera. But no, there's no way for you to ever get into the physical database. It's just never going to happen. So I missed that comment. Somebody about an orphan, then you can see the physical database. No, you can't. You can never see the physical database. Everything you look at as a developer is always an abstraction of the physical database. Always, always, always. Yeah. Now, if you're using the metadata API, then that's a little bit different. But as just a regular old developer, no, there's no way you can get to the physical database.
Is that something that like an architect would be able to see or get close to?
Nope. It's their secret sauce. You're not allowed. You get what you get. You get this abstraction level, which makes it profoundly easy for you to create objects and relationships. You do not get to see the actual physical implementation. Go to that white paper that I referenced, and that'll kind of tell you a little bit how they do it. But no, you don't get to see the physical implementation. That's their secret sauce. That's how Salesforce makes their money. Yeah, it's very cool. And I agree with this question. Why would you want to? I like abstract data rather than physical data. But yeah, but if you're a DBA, I can sort of understand that. But DBAs, no, Salesforce DBAs, yeah, but a DBA at your customer or my customer, nope. All they ever get to see is that logical view of the data. It's the forbidden fruit. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, sure. Let me see here. Happy to jam. Hello. Just making sure I'm not missing anything here. All right, I think we're good. If in a loosely coupled relationship, if you delete the parent, does the parent become an orphan? Yes, in a loosely coupled relationship, it becomes an orphan, right? So it will have no parent. Correct. The recordings are in the boot camp org, not in your trailhead orgs, but in the actual boot camp org. I don't know what your usernames are. My username is of the form myname.tvb.salesforce.com. And it should look something like this. And then if I go into the content, am I sharing the org again? I don't think I am. Let me make sure I'm sharing it. Sorry, my fingers have stopped working.
Yes, we can see your screen. You're fine.
Okay, all right, cool. Forgetting where they put them. So I thought it was going to be right here. If I click on the instructor welcome session, yeah, there it is. So if you click on that instructor welcome session, that's the session that Jeff did last Monday. Let me get out of there because I don't want to actually watch that though. And if we look at day 3, if I click on the instructor QA session, that will actually take you out to the recording. And it might only take a few hours, but within some amount of time after I close the meeting today, this one will be uploaded as well, and you'll be able to look at it as well. Yeah, so they'll all be out there. Okay, friends, we're at the end of our time here. Again, feel free to log cases if you're having any issues. Otherwise, I will be talking to at least some of you, many of you, I hope, on Wednesday for our QA session. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye. Talk to you soon.